You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. We're closing in on the deadline for President Trump's rescissions package. Senate Republicans have until this Friday to pass the package with a simple majority. If they don't do that, they'll face a Democratic filibuster and need 60 votes to overcome it. Yesterday, the Senate voted to advance rescissions with a 51-50 vote. That's with Vice President JD Vance casting a tiebreaker. Republican Senators Collins, Murkowski, and McConnell voted no. Today, senators will have up to 10 hours of debate before the final floor vote. If they pass the package, it'll then head back to the House for a vote before going to the president's desk. Again, this all needs to happen by the end of Friday. And I know that was a lot of procedural details, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty. If this rescissions package passes, the administration would claw back $9 billion in previously approved funding, most of which is intended for global health and foreign aid projects. It would also rescind more than $1 billion currently budgeted for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB. Now, you're listening to public radio right now, so you are probably aware that those dollars include funding for KUOW, as well as other local public radio and TV stations, which receive support from CPB. What exactly would the impact of rescission be for Seattle stations? Can public media survive these cuts? And with news becoming increasingly fragmented, should taxpayers still be paying for public media? I'm going to put those questions to leaders of local public media organizations right now from the Seattle area. Carrie Swanson is interim CEO of KUOW. Rob Dunlop is CEO and president of Cascade PBS. And Ethan Raup is CEO and president of KEXP. And they all join me now, either in studio or on Zoom. Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Libby. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You are very welcome.
So I want to start with the basics. If the rescission package passes by Friday, what does it mean for each of your organizations? What kind of funding are you expected to lose? And Ethan, let's start with you at KEXP, and then we're going to go around the room.
Sure. Thank you, Libby. KEXP gets an annual CPB grant of around $700,000 a year, which is a little over 5% of our annual operating budget. So a cut of that size hurts. There's no way around it. But also it's not debilitating. Enriching lives through music and discovery. That's what we do. We're helping make the world a better place. And we have ambition to do more. And Lord knows we need it. So this is a step backwards and is forcing us to check some of that ambition and to prioritize. But like KUOW, we have an incredible community, and they're stepping up to help us get through this. It's not realistic to think that that level of additional support will last over the long term, but I do believe it'll help us bridge the gap over the next few years. I think the bigger issue is that there are a lot of stations across the country who won't survive this. That's the truth. And a lot of them are in areas that desperately need the kind of connective tissue and variety of perspectives and community building that local public stations provide and do really well. And that's worrisome. We need that variety of perspectives and to be able to listen better, all of us. We need to build up bridges and that connective tissue and start tearing down walls and busting out of some of this polarization and isolation. We need that so badly.
Thanks, Ethan. And I want to read a quick listener message that we got from our network, Rob, before we get to what's going on at Cascade PBS. This is from a listener who said, I was featured on Cascade PBS Out and Back, the program. And that is a show that features people of color who are reclaiming the outdoors. And this person, is saying, I can only imagine what this reduction in budget might mean for Cascade PBS. And they're fearful maybe it's the last time they're going to see this kind of local programming. So tell me, Rob, what is going on with the rescission package in Cascade? What is the impact expected to be?
Sure. And they're absolutely right. This will largely impact a lot of local programming. And so for the president's message about NPR and PBS, those two national organizations will not be nearly as impacted as what will happen to local stations across the country. At Cascade PBS, we receive a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting of about $3.5 million. That's about 10% of our operating budget. And most of the impact from that will end up hitting local programming. So there will be changes that we'll just naturally have to figure out a way to make. And yes, I think we recognize that our national organizations, NPR and PBS, will also adapt and make changes and restructure how they go about things. But at the end of the day, the bigger impact will be what happens to local stations. And as Ethan has mentioned, the rural communities for which their local public broadcaster may be their only lifeline to actually like real news and journalism will be the most affected, and the public safety and public service components of what we do. So there will be an effect there. And sadly, it will be local stations that serve a lot of these communities more impacted than the national organizations like NPR and PBS.
Carrie, we're hearing at KEXP, it's about 5%. At Cascade PBS, it's about 10%. What does the picture look like for rescission package and the impact on KUOW?
That's right. On KUOW, it's very similar. It's about 5%. It's about $1 million in federal grants that we get from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. But that's not the whole story, because in addition, CPB helps fund the satellite system that delivers the programming from NPR to local stations. So that very structural, operational thing is at stake as well. So when you really think about it, then all the local stations are going to have to up their own fees and to replace that funding. So really the impact for a station like KUOW is closer to $1.4 million. But it is going to totally weaken public broadcasting. And I think about, my former time in the Eastern Washington area, where stations in Ephrata and Walla Walla and Yakima and all over Omak, where the fire season comes up, most of the times Northwest Public Broadcasting was the only voice that was available. You didn't have to get your cell phone or anything like that. You turned on your radio and you were getting information on when to evacuate. Those kinds of things are really essential. And that's the kind of thing that's at stake right now.
I'm curious how you're communicating with audiences and what you're hearing from them. Ethan, there was this cool 24 or 27-hour radiothon that your morning crew pulled off, John and the whole crew there, John Richards. Did you kind of plan that ahead of time? Was that a spur of the moment type of thing? Are you just trying everything to try to get people's attention on this, to kind of wake up to the fact that we are looking at these large cuts?
Well, it was a little bit of both. We have been watching rescission coming at us for some time now, and have had a lot of conversations internally about how to address it with our staff and with our external audience as well. And, John and Morgan have been thinking about what kind of an impact they could have heading into our spring drive. It just happened to coincide with the House vote that day. And so, we'd given it some thought in advance, but also there was some spontaneity to it. And, I do think it's an example of the power of radio and public media to step in and make a difference and communicate and connect with people on issues that really matter. And, I didn't make it the full 27 hours, but I stayed up most of the night in the gathering space with John and Morgan. And, we had a lot of support and folks on from public media in Washington State and around the country. And it was pretty remarkable, the outpouring and response. And I guess, one thing I will say is that as we've navigated these waters over the last 7 months, it's been really tough for our community and for our staff. And that goes beyond CPB funding, of course. It has been tough. There's a degree, I would say, of bewilderment watching so many pillars of what has actually made America great being systematically dismantled. And along with that sense of disbelief, there's also, I think, anger and frustration at not having any real ability to do anything about it. It's not only one party rule, but rule by one party that's been hijacked by a cult. And so, how to channel some of those emotions, that anger and frustration, into something that matters is a real challenge. And also how to make sure that you don't get stuck. We don't get stuck as an organization or individually in a negative spin cycle. And so I just want to say that overall, I'm optimistic. I really am. as bad as it might get here for a while, there's so much great stuff happening out there. So many great people leaning in different ways and doing their best to make a difference. And it all adds up. This polarization and division, it builds on itself. I think we've all experienced that. But so does optimism and positivity. That's true too. And it's been really important for us internally and externally to keep that in mind. And I think it's making a difference, including the 27-hour marathon. And Rob Dunlop, thank you for joining us for that.
Thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun. That was great.
We really appreciated having your voice in the mix.
Rob, I'm curious, if these cuts do go through, how soon might programming be affected at Cascade PBS? And I'm going to ask the same to Carrie at KUOW.
Sure. We've not drafted a plan yet. We're fortunate enough, and I think each of us have stated such, that the community here is generous to public media. And we have a really supportive group of donors and audience members who make what we do possible to a large extent. In our case, 90% of what we receive in terms of revenue comes from our community. So we're taking a really thoughtful, deep breath approach to this. We're not going to run out tomorrow or on Friday or Saturday and start making radical changes. I think we want to take a very measured and thoughtful approach to how do we make sure we continue to serve our community in the ways that our community expects from us, and continue to put an emphasis as much as possible on the local service that we provide, because that is the difference maker. I think that public broadcasting really is similar but quite distinct from the commercial media space. I think our mission, each of us, respectively, is to really think about how our community is best served. How do we make the world a better place? And the commercial media world doesn't quite have an orientation around that specifically. And for us, that's ground zero. And so we're going to take a really thoughtful approach to what we do. I don't have a timetable for when we will make changes. We are very fortunate to be in a position to be able to take some time and to think this through. And so we will get our team together. We'll hear from the folks in our operation about where and what we think we need to do in order to thread the needle around best serving the community, and obviously creating a sustainable long-term enterprise that can survive without this funding support if that's necessary.
Is it safe to say, if there's not a dramatic change in fortune and these cuts do go through, that there will have to be hard decisions about local programming, local staffing?
No doubt. I think that as Ethan mentioned, we will see, I think, our donor community in a crisis has always risen to the occasion and provided some additional support. And we're incredibly grateful for those moments when they occur. But that's not a sustainable business model either. And so we will have to think about how we think about staffing, we think about programming and so forth. I think it's important to also recognize we are a system, and it's a system that is comprised of our national partners too, who will make changes and whose changes will in turn affect the way we operate. And so there are factors and influences there that may also weigh in on the degree to which we need to make changes locally ourselves. So changes will need to occur. We're just not clear right now the extent to which those changes will have to take place.
Carrie at KUOW, how soon are we expecting to have to see programming or staffing changes, and what shape might those take? If the bill passes, obviously.
That's right. Our priority has always been journalism and serving our community with the best journalism and information programming that we can, and that will continue to be it. So we have some contingency plans to do some additional fundraising, and we'll have to see kind of how those go and what the next steps would be. But in the meantime, we're looking for every place that we can pinch our pennies or tighten our belt to make sure that the operational funding goes as much to the programming and distribution as we can possible. What I'm more concerned about is some of our partners. We talked about this being, a system. And so at Northwest Public Broadcasting, they have, several reporters that report on Eastern Washington, and you hear some of those reports because we share stories back and forth with our partners across the Cascades. It could be that some of those voices are silenced because I don't know exactly what their makeup is going to be, but I know that that will have to be a factor that they'll be thinking about too. So it's a system that relies on each other, and it's very unfortunate that a lot of the communities are at stake. Their local broadcasts are at stake.
Can I ask you a question about the ways that KUOW brings in programming? Because when you mentioned Northwest Public Broadcasting, I think some people don't quite understand the way that KUOW is like woven together from, the National Public Broadcasting, from American Public Media, which brings us Marketplace.
Right.
We had a question from Emma in Georgetown who asked us, what does it cost for KUOW to play Marketplace 3 times a day? Could a reduction in nationally syndicated programming redirect our local stations to produce more local programming? So Emma's kind of trying to take this positive look, being like, if there's fewer federal dollars coming in, does that mean we get, in her words, maybe less slick, less polished local shows? I'm assuming she means like Soundside, less slick, less polished, more local. That should be our tagline.
Come on, Libby.
I know, I love that. I actually love that for advertising. Emma's helping us out with that. So basically, Emma says, could a blow to NPR be a push to reinvest in cheaper, more homegrown content? What's your reaction to that, Carrie?
I think that's actually a very good observation, that we have more opportunity to take our local programs and distribute them more often or create new ones. There is an opportunity there. Local programming, though, does cost more just in general to create because you don't have, all bunch of other partner stations flipping the bill a little bit. So there's a cost benefit ratio there, but it does give us an opportunity to really dig in and find out what is important to our local community. And what you were asking for about earlier is that KUOW gets some programming from NPR and from other entities like BBC and American Public Media. We create some of our own that you hear. And then we also have partners here in the Northwest that house their own local journalists, and we'll pick up stories from them. And we share stories back with them. So the Northwest becomes like a really cool knitted sweater, with lots of different connections across the mountains.
But in that way, when one piece is pulled, the one thread is pulled, then the whole picture can change.
The whole picture can change, yeah.
I'm talking with KUOW's interim CEO, Carrie Swanson, also the CEO and president of Cascade PBS, Rob Dunlop, and CEO and president of KEXP, Ethan Raup. It is a panel of public media leaders in the Seattle area reacting to what's going on in Congress right now, the attempted clawing back by Republicans of $1.1 billion in Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding. That has to pass by the end of the day Friday in order to overcome the filibuster. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation discussing whether taxpayers should still be asked to pay for public broadcasting. That's in just a minute right here on KUOW. Back with more Soundside, I'm Libby Denkman, and we're discussing the rescission package currently making its way through the Senate in D.C. and its potential impact on local public media organizations. I'm joined by the interim CEO of KUOW, Carrie Swanson, the CEO and president of KEXP, Ethan Raup, and CEO and president of Cascade PBS, Rob Dunlop. Rob, you mentioned earlier the post on Truth Social by President Trump. You kind of did a glancing mention of it, but I just want to read it in full here. Quote, "It is very important that all Republicans adhere to my rescission bill and in particular defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS and NPR, which is worse than CNN and MSDNC put together. Any Republican that votes to allow this monstrosity to continue broadcasting will not have my support or endorsement." What was your reaction when you first saw that the president was pushing hard in this way for this rescission bill against PBS and NPR, specifically saying that this is biased programming?
Yeah, I think, this is a very similar pattern from him in terms of approach and attitude that he has taken to a number of things. So I don't necessarily look at the language he's using specifically related to public broadcasting as being significantly different, or the posture he's taking, at least with respect to the public broadcasting issue, as being radically different than what he's doing in global health or in other spheres. I do think that when you consider what we do at PBS and NPR and local stations, I would push back vigorously on his claims of bias. We work extremely hard, I think, across both mediums to be as reflective of the communities more broadly than any other media organizations tend to do. Now, we are very community-based, and so we do look for elevating every voice in our community. And that's very different in a sense from the commercial media environment, where their job is to try to amass the largest possible audience that they can sell. And that often leaves certain communities out of the conversation altogether because they aren't marketable communities. And we don't do that in the public media sphere. We really seek to try to bring every part of our community together. And sometimes those voices feel threatening to some people. And I feel like that's part of the motivation that we're hearing from the president in a tweet like that.
Rich Lowry, who writes for the National Review, which is a conservative publication, wrote a piece this week that is entitled "Big Bird Deserves to Lose This Time." And there's a select quote I wanted to pull here. "If NPR and PBS programming is as compelling and vital as its defenders say, it shouldn't be a heavy lift to get foundations, philanthropists, and devoted listeners and viewers to fill any funding gap." And he's basically saying here that, there's YouTube, there's a million podcasts these days. Why should taxpayers prop up certain sources of media? And Rob, I think you spoke to some of that and what makes public media different here. But Ethan, I wonder if you could jump in on that.
I would love to. Public benefit, the common good. These are so important, and I've watched them in this country over the course of my lifetime get kicked to the curb and even looked down on and treated with disdain. We had Rick Steves on the air a few weeks ago when we did the 27-hour public media marathon broadcast. And he spoke so well and with such knowledge about what he's seen and experienced in other countries and cultures, where the private market hasn't taken over everything, where there's still room for the public realm and the broad common good. I've seen that myself, and what it means to live in a place that invests in its people and in healthcare and transportation, and where there isn't such scarcity and meanness and just an overwhelming stressfulness to life. It feels pretty good, and public media is a part of that. Our media ecosystem in the US is broken. Just look at what's happened to CBS News and 60 Minutes. We have a media environment dominated by interests that are fundamentally at odds with service to the public. Venture capitalists, private equity firms, giant social media platforms, big media conglomerates that dominate the space and where the bottom line is the primary motivation, not service to the public. Journalistic integrity, coverage of local issues and local culture, representation of a broad range of ideas and perspectives. There's not much room for any of that anymore. And as Rob said, public media is helping to fill that growing vacuum with coverage that matters and simply wouldn't exist if left to the marketplace.
Carrie, what do you think? Does Big Bird and Rick Steves deserve to lose this time? Does the battle over bias in the media now spill over and say, yeah, taxpayers no longer can support news because no news is apparently considered unbiased anymore? I mean, what's your reflection on this?
A couple of things. First of all, public broadcasting has had bipartisan support for years and years and years. Why is now the opportunity? I think those who threaten open access to information do so because they fear the power of an informed public. We're not talking about really a budget issue here, because when you look at how much money the Corporation for Public Broadcasting receives and then distributes to stations, you are talking about 1/100th of 1% of the federal budget. I think of public media like my local library. It's got tons of books in there. Do I agree with everything that's in every one of those books? No, probably not. But I'm glad it's there because I know that it's a resource that I can go to and it's there for the community's good. And when I think about natural disasters, and we talked a little bit about the emergency alert system that is so much of the fabric of public broadcasting, especially in rural places, I think about who's going to report on those things when those natural disasters happen. Most of the time, it's going to be the public broadcasting people that are on the ground. Most commercial media stations, radio stations, don't have that kind of capacity to do that, and that's not part of their mission. So we're really talking about the life of the local community here in wherever you live being affected by this potential rescission of funding.
Rob Dunlop, I want to give you the last word here. Kate wrote in and asked a really simple question. Kate resides in Northeast Seattle. What can we as citizens do about this?
Well, I think the thing that all of us have been trying to do is alert the public to exactly the way this system works and what's at stake.
It's awkward, though, Rob. I feel weird about reporting this sort of story, which affects our potential future on air, right?
Yeah, it does feel awkward.
Obviously, yes. Carrie's not saying they're going to pull the plug on this show, tomorrow if the rescission goes through, but it is weird to be the story. And so I've felt a little oddness about covering it directly. But yeah, go ahead. You're saying about...
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right about that. We've all been on the phone and hopefully encouraging our community to get on the phone with our elected officials because it really sits in their hands. It sits in their hands at this very moment, certainly. But for several weeks, we've been really trying to encourage and inspire our community to help tell our story, help tell our elected officials what this system means to them and to their local communities. And so I know that has happened. They've been flooded with emails and phone calls to our elected officials' offices, and we have a very supportive delegation in our state. There are many other places across the country where that's a more challenging conversation. So we're incredibly grateful to the community that listens to us, that watches us, that has been out there advocating for us with our elected officials. At this point, keep that pressure on, because until this is over, it's not over. And if this does move through the Senate today and it moves on to the House, there's still an opportunity to have that conversation with your elected officials to let them know how important community and public broadcasting is. I think it's important also to note that in most communities across the country, your local public broadcasting station, radio or television, is really the last locally governed and operated and owned by the community media that exists in most places across the country. And that's not something we should let go.
Yeah, most stations are owned by, Sinclair or some larger company that is not necessarily beholden to audiences here in the community. Rob Dunlop, CEO and president of Cascade PBS. Thank you also to Ethan Raup, CEO and president of KEXP, and to Carrie Swanson, interim CEO of KUOW. I really appreciate all your time today. Again, it's been awkward to become the story as public media creators, and you've done a great job kind of walking through all the arguments here and what people can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.